What if the person you've been overlooking every day was a heart and soul of your entire business? Tonight, one undercover CEO walks into his own restaurant, expecting a routine visit, but what he finds instead will shake him to his core. A waitress is in tears, the staff are stretched thin, and the very culture he built is at risk. This is a story of dedication, hidden struggles, and a single moment of kindness that changes everything. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, casting a silvery sheen across the streets of downtown Chicago. Neon lights reflected off the slick pavement, creating pools of color that danced with every passing car. David Harrison, founder and owner of Harrison's Prime, walked slowly toward the restaurant he had built from nothing decades ago. But tonight, he wasn't a man in a tailored suit or polished shoes. Tonight, he was just another customer, indistinguishable from the crowd, carrying a soaked jacket and a sense of quiet purpose. He had heard troubling whispers from patrons, complaints about the service at his flagship location, and tonight he needed to see for himself. Something inside him told him this visit would reveal more than just minor hiccups. It would expose the heartbeat of his restaurant for better or worse. He pushed open the glass doors, letting the warmth of the interior seep through his damp clothing. The gentle hum of conversation enveloped him, but beneath it, a tension lingered, subtle but undeniable. The hostess barely glanced up as he approached, her expression flat, her hand hovering over a menu, as if with the most tedious object in the world. "Just one?" she asked, her tone devoid of curiosity or warmth. David nodded, masking the pang of disappointment that struck him. He had worked for years to cultivate a welcoming atmosphere, one that made every guest feel seen, valued, and at home. Yet, as he was shown to a small table near the kitchen doors, the kind reserved for customers deemed unimportant, he sensed that something vital had shifted. The energy of his restaurant, once vibrant and alive, now felt like a carefully rehearsed performance. Smiles and greetings executed with precision, but lacking true heart. Settling into his chair, David watched the servers weave between tables with mechanical efficiency. Their faces were painted with polite smiles, but their eyes betrayed fatigue and indifference. Laughter echoed across the dining room, but it felt hollow, forced, like actors performing a script they didn't believe in. And then he saw her, a black woman, poised and deliberate in her movements, maneuvered gracefully between tables, her presence quietly commanding. Her name tag read Monique, and David's attention was immediately drawn to her. Unlike her colleagues, she didn't rush or act attached. She paused, engaged with each customer, refilled water glasses before they were empty, and somehow managed to make each person feel uniquely cared for. Her professionalism wasn't performative. It was genuine, born of years of dedication and experience. Yet, David noticed something deeper beneath her composed exterior. The other servers exchanged subtle glances as she passed, rolling their eyes or whispering behind their hands. It was a silent acknowledgement that she carried herself differently, that her commitment exposed their own mediocrity. Monique's back bore the weight of long hours, constant demands, and unrelenting expectations. Her smile flickered for a moment when she thought no one was watching, and in that small instant, David realized the strain she carried was invisible to most, yet profound. He felt a tightening in his chest, a mixture of admiration and sorrow. Here was someone who embodied everything he had envisioned for his restaurants, yet she labored under conditions that undermined her efforts, and worse, were unnoticed by the leadership he had entrusted. The dinner crowd intensified. A businessman snapped impatiently for attention, a young couple argued over an appetizer, and an elderly woman insisted her soup had been made incorrectly. Through it all, Monique moved with a precision and grace that seemed almost otherworldly. She remembered that Table 8 preferred decaf, that the family celebrating an anniversary at Table 4 wanted a quiet corner, that the nervous teenager at Table 6 needed reassurance while handing over his first credit card payment. Her attentiveness was meticulous, born not of obligation, but a sincere desire to provide comfort, dignity, and care to every person she served. And yet, beneath her poise, there was exhaustion, a quiet tremor in her hands, deep breaths taken between orders, a careful calculation of tips as if each dollar was a lifeline. David's own meal arrived, a modest chicken dinner. He hadn't chosen to impress anyone, but to observe without drawing attention. His eyes remained fixed on Monique. He watched as she diffused a tense situation with a customer who had spilled a drink, offering an apology and even a small personal compensation, all while maintaining her composure. He noted the subtle acts of kindness that went beyond professional expectation, bringing crayons to a restless toddler, sharing a quiet joke with an anxious first-time diner, remembering small preferences that made guests feel valued. And then he saw her step into a small alcove near the kitchen, her composure faltering for the briefest of moments. Her hands shook, her shoulders slumped, and he realized she was crying quietly, privately, under the weight of invisible pressures. The evening continued, and David began piecing together Monique's story from observation and interaction. She had been with the restaurant for nearly a decade, starting after a period of personal loss and hardship, and she had poured herself into this work as both a lifeline and a testament to resilience. Her dedication contrasted sharply with the behavior of the new manager, a sharp-faced young man named Tyler, who treated staff like interchangeable parts, barking orders and cutting corners. David's gaze shifted repeatedly between Monique and Tyler, and with each interaction, the contrast became starker. One moment, Monique offered a compassionate solution to a customer complaint. The next, Tyler rolled his eyes, dismissed her suggestions, and prioritized efficiency over human connection. By the end of the dinner rush, David's quiet observation had turned into a deep, almost protective concern. Monique, despite everything, continued to perform flawlessly, while the staff around her struggled under mismanagement and lack of recognition. He noticed how she counted her tips carefully, worried about finances, yet still prioritized the experience of every guest. He observed her interactions with colleagues, her patience and tact, and the subtle fatigue that suggested long-term stress rather than temporary exhaustion. David realized that the single employee represented the soul of his restaurant, a living embodiment of the culture he had hoped to cultivate when he first opened the doors. And yet, she carried that weight largely alone, invisible to the leadership structure he had allowed to evolve. When Monique returned to the floor after a brief pause, she carried herself with renewed composure, but the tension in her shoulders remained. David watched, noting the delicate balance she maintained between professionalism and emotional strain. He wondered how many small moments of kindness she had given that went unnoticed, how many times she had silently absorbed criticism or handled difficult guests with grace. The realization struck him. The problems at Harrison's Prime were not merely operational, they were human. The restaurant's success relied on people like Monique, yet the system and leadership often failed to support them. In that moment, David knew that what he was witnessing was a lesson far greater than any financial report or quarterly metric. This was the heart of the business, and it was being neglected. David waited until the rush quieted, the clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation fading into the background. He observed Monique as she moved between tables, the careful rhythm of her work betraying a dedication that was exhausting yet unshakable. He noticed how her smile, though genuine, had traces of strain, an invisible ledger of stress she carried silently. Patrons complimented her service, unaware of the small victories and sacrifices she had made that evening or the countless others like it. Each act of attentiveness, each patient word, each minor concession was a testament to her resilience. And yet, the structural cracks in the restaurant's leadership, embodied by Tyler, the manager, threatened to erode the very spirit that made Harrison's Prime exceptional. Tyler was busy barking instructions, scrutinizing staff like a hawk while failing to notice the humanity of those beneath him. He cut hours, hired part-time employees to replace seasoned servers, and reduced benefits, all in the name of efficiency. David's chest tightened as he saw the cumulative effect on the team. Subtle exhaustion forced smiles, whispered frustrations. Monique approached a difficult table with measured grace, diffusing tension with a calmness that belied her internal fatigue. Tyler rolled his eyes as she suggested a complimentary dessert to celebrate a patron's anniversary. The contrast between her compassionate professionalism and his cold pragmatism was stark, almost painful to watch. David realized that this was not just a single incident of mismanagement. It was a systemic failure that threatened the culture he had painstakingly built over decades. As he observed, David reflected on his own journey. 40 years ago, he had started with a single diner, a modest space where warmth and genuine care had been the currency of success. Now, with 17 upscale locations, The personal connection he once fostered had been diluted. He had become a CEO, a distant figure whose presence was rarely felt by those who carried the weight of daily operations. Yet in Monique, he saw the embodiment of his original vision: integrity, empathy, and devotion to service. She was the pulse of Harrison's prime, the reason customers returned and staff found pride in their work. And she was quietly suffering, unnoticed by the very people who should have recognized her value. The evening unfolded with a series of small, poignant interactions. Monique guided a young mother through a seating issue, entertained a shy child with hand-drawn sketches, and calmly addressed a senior customer's repeated complaints about his soup. Each gesture demonstrated patience, kindness, and commitment that transcended mere job description. When a spill occurred near table 12, Monique handled it with tact, apologizing sincerely while calming the frustrated patron, and even covering the cost for cleaning without hesitation. Meanwhile, Tyler's attention was elsewhere, focused on schedules and reports rather than the people who made the restaurant run. The disparity was clear. Leadership had shifted from nurturing the human element to prioritizing numbers over compassion. David's heart sank, recognizing the irony that the very systems designed to sustain his empire were suffocating the spirit he had once nurtured. At a quiet moment, David saw Monique retreat to the small alcove near the kitchen, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes. It was brief, almost imperceptible, yet it spoke volumes. The weight she carried, both personal and professional, had accumulated to a point where even the strongest facade faltered. David's mind raced, piecing together the story she was living through observation alone. Long hours, financial stress, personal sacrifices, and a deep, unwavering commitment to the people she served. He realized that the health of his restaurant was inseparable from the well-being of his employees. Monique's struggle was not just hers. It reflected the gaps in leadership and culture that threatened the very soul of Harrison's prime. Unable to remain a passive observer any longer, David decided to engage her. He waited until she passed his table, gently calling her over. Her approach was measured, cautious. She had learned to navigate the restaurant's environment with poise, even under duress. "Everything okay with your tables?" he asked softly, his tone non-threatening, warm. Monique responded with practiced professionalism, though David noticed a slight tension in her posture. He spoke quietly, ensuring Tyler was not close enough to overhear. "I just wanted to understand, how are things going here?" Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and relief flickering across her face. For the first time that evening, she could speak candidly to someone who genuinely cared. Monique began to share her story, cautiously at first. 8 years at Harrison's prime, starting after personal loss, building stability for her daughter, maintaining dignity in the face of overwhelming demands. David listened, piecing together the silent sacrifices she had made, covering extra shifts, managing irate customers with grace, mentoring new employees while her own hours were cut, and stretching her salary to cover living expenses. Tyler's management philosophy, she explained quietly, had drastically reduced her hours, eliminated certain benefits, and created a climate of fear and stress. David felt a knot tighten in his chest, anger mingling with sorrow. He had trusted leadership to protect the culture he valued. Yet here was one of his most dedicated employees struggling in silence, nearly invisible to the organization he had built. The restaurant had quieted further, staff preoccupied with closing routines. The dining room emptied of patrons except for lingering table interactions. David's attention remained fixed on Monique, recognizing both her weariness and her unwavering dedication. He saw how deeply she cared, not for recognition or reward, but because it was who she was, a keeper of the restaurant's soul, ensuring that every customer felt valued. He reflected on the contrast between the vision he had for Harrison's prime and the reality imposed by managerial oversight. The human connection, the warmth that had originally defined his brand, was being eroded, yet Monique preserved it with quiet strength. David finally rose from his chair, deciding it was time to intervene. He approached Tyler, whose demeanor remained curt and dismissive. "Excuse me," David began, his voice calm but carrying authority. "I'd like to discuss something important about our operations." Tyler looked surprised, confused, and slightly defensive. "Sir, we're closed," he said, attempting to maintain control. "I'm aware." David replied evenly, and with a steady hand, he revealed the truth. He was David Harrison, the owner of Harrison's Prime. The room went silent, employees frozen mid-motion, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Monique's eyes widened, her mouth opening slightly in astonishment, tears brimming as the truth settled. The contrast was stark. The man they thought distant, detached, and inaccessible was standing before them, witnessing their daily struggles firsthand. David turned back to Monique, his tone gentle. "I remember hiring you," he said, "and I promised you a place where your work mattered, where you would be valued. I've been absent in seeing how my promise has been lived out, and tonight I see everything clearly." Monique's composure faltered, tears slipping freely as she nodded, unable to speak. Around them, the staff began to process the revelation, recognizing the depth of mismanagement and the misconnections that had silently eroded morale. David addressed Tyler firmly, pointing out the consequences of cutting hours, dismissing employee concerns, and treating seasoned staff as disposable. The room was tense, every eye fixed on the unfolding confrontation, a powerful mix of accountability, relief, and hope. David's words hung in the air, heavy with authority and truth. For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to stand still. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance faltering as he realized the weight of the situation. The man he had dismissed as just another customer was, in fact, the very owner of the empire he thought he controlled. A flush of red crept up his neck as he attempted to stammer out an explanation, but David raised a hand, silencing him with a quiet force more powerful than any outburst. "This isn't about excuses," David said firmly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "This is about the culture of this restaurant. The culture I built, the culture I entrusted to leaders who should have cared as deeply as I do. And what I've seen tonight is unacceptable." The staff remained frozen, wide-eyed and tense, their collective silence broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator in the back. Monique stood slightly apart, her trembling hands clasped in front of her, tears threatening to fall again. She had endured years of invisibility, her hard work masked by a system that refused to see her worth. But tonight, someone was finally noticing, someone who mattered. David turned his gaze directly to Tyler. "You've reduced hours, stripped benefits, and belittled staff who've given more to this company than you could ever imagine. Efficiency does not come at the cost of humanity. You have failed to understand that." His words cut cleanly, deliberate, and measured. Tyler's shoulders slumped, his bravado collapsing under the weight of accountability. And then David shifted, his focus softening as he turned toward Monique. "But tonight," he said gently, "I also saw the spirit of this place, the true heart of Harrison's Prime, alive in you." The room seemed to exhale collectively. Monique's lips parted, a small, incredulous shake of her head betraying her disbelief. "Me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. David nodded, his expression solemn but warm. "Yes, you. For years, you've carried this place on your shoulders. I watched you diffuse tension, lift others when they faltered, and embody the kind of service that made this restaurant what it was meant to be. You've given kindness where there was none, patience where it was undeserved. You preserved the very values I built this company on." The tears she had tried to hold back slipped freely down her cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hand, shaking with the sudden release of years of unspoken frustration, exhaustion, and longing for acknowledgement. Her co-workers, many of whom had taken her efforts for granted, now stared with wide eyes, some in shame, others in awe. David stepped closer, his tone softening even further. "I should have been here sooner. I should have seen this with my own eyes, not through reports or filtered feedback. For that, I owe you an apology." Monique's shoulders sagged as the word sank in, her body trembling from the gravity of the moment. Never in her career had anyone in leadership spoken to her like this, acknowledging her humanity, her sacrifices, her worth. The emotional weight was almost too much to bear. Tyler, desperate to salvage his reputation, interjected clumsily. "Sir, I was only following standard procedures. Cutting hours, adjusting schedules. It's what the numbers required. You have to understand." David turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What I understand is this. You confuse numbers with people. You measure success in spreadsheets and forgot that it's built in moments, moment of connection, care, and trust. People don't come back here for efficiency. They come back because they feel something. His voice grew steadier, louder, carrying conviction that reverberated across the dining room. And Monique has given him that feeling every single day. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler lowered his gaze, his confidence fully unraveled. David took a step back, surveying the room, then spoke directly to the staff. This restaurant is not walls and tables. It is not menus or profit margins. It is you, every single one of you. And I need you to understand something. Your worth is not invisible. I will not allow it to be invisible again. The employees exchanged looks, their faces reflecting a mix of relief, shame, and cautious hope. Some nodded subtly, others blinked back tears. The weight of being seen, finally, settled on him like sunlight breaking through a storm. David turned again to Monique, his voice firm but gentle. Starting tonight, things change. You will no longer carry this burden alone. You deserve recognition, support, and leadership that honors your dedication. He paused and added, and if you'll accept, I'd like to meet with you personally to discuss how we can make that happen, because Harrison's Prime needs leaders like you. Gasps rippled quietly through the staff. Monique's hand pressed against her chest, her breath catching. She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say, she murmured. You don't have to say anything right now, David reassured her. Just know that you've been seen. Truly seen. For the first time that evening, a genuine smile broke across Monique's tear-streaked face. A smile not of forced professionalism, but release of validation, of hope. David then addressed the team one final time. This place was meant to be a family. Somewhere people could not only earn a living, but feel proud of what they build together. Somewhere customers walk in and feel that pride in every interaction. That is what Monique reminded me of tonight. That is what we must protect. The words resonated deeply. Even the most skeptical staff members felt their defenses soften. Something had shifted, something undeniable. Tyler stood awkwardly in the corner, his authority stripped bare. David fixed him with a steady gaze. We will be reviewing your position here, he said firmly. This restaurant cannot thrive under leadership that diminishes rather than uplifts. Tyler nodded stiffly, his silence an admission of guilt. The night ended not with the sterile clatter of closing routines, but with an air of renewal. Staff lingered, conversations hushed but hopeful. Monique, still trembling, found herself surrounded by co-workers offering quiet words of gratitude, their recognition long overdue. As David prepared to leave, he paused near the door, glancing back one final time. The restaurant looked different now, not in appearance, but in spirit. For the first time in years, he felt the pulse of what he built beating again, strong and alive. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the soft glow of streetlights, as if the world itself had been washed clean. David pulled his jacket tighter, his heart heavy yet hopeful. He knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of repair, of reclaiming the soul of his restaurants, one act of recognition at a time. And as Monique wiped the last of her tears, standing a little taller than before, she knew something had changed forever. She was no longer invisible. She was a heartbeat. And finally, someone had heard it.